Hey there, good people. Big Heavy, and today I am talking hernias. I had the recent pleasure or displeasure, as the case may be, of being diagnosed with an inguinal hernia. And as a runner and just middle-aged human, wanted to share my experience of figuring out that I had this problem, what the surgery was like. I'm about 8 days into the recovery period, how that all worked out. And this is not something that I knew a heck of a lot about, so thought I'd share my thoughts. And as always, despite having listened to a lot of Dr. Dre in my formative years, I am not a medical professional. I am just a big dumb animal. So consult your doctor, consult people that actually know about this stuff. But I do think there is something to be learned from anecdotes and anecdotal experience, although obviously don't take that as medical advice. So let's start off with what a hernia actually is and how I am relatively sure that I got my hernia. So my understanding, and again, I'm not a doctor or anything, but the simplified version is a hernia is kind of a generic term for any time something kind of pops out from where it's supposed to be. So the common case is your, intestines, stomach, kind of gut type area. A little piece of that pops out through that muscular wall in your abdomen and ultimately gets pinched in there and, causes either some discomfort or in the worst case, that kind of critical piece of your body, like an intestine or something, gets jammed out of there, gets sort of cut off, and you can end up having some longer term problems. This seems to be more of a common phenomenon in men versus women. Not sure why that's the case or what sort of the biology is behind that. But most of my research seemed to indicate this was something that, at least for the one I had, which was kind of down in the groin area, is something that generally occurs in men. Now, in terms of how this happened to me, best I can tell is it happened when I went to a water park with a family, which was basically a former quarry. So, big old hole in the ground filled with water. And they had various places and platforms where you could go and jump into the water. They had this big rope swing where you kind of swing from this platform and pop yourself into the water. And the way you get out of the water ultimately was climbing up this, 8-10-ish foot ladder. And I remember at the time I was doing more strength training and I thought, oh, it'd be fun to see how fast I could go up the ladder. And, that'd be some sort of good strength workout while goofing around and having fun with the family. So best I can theorize is it was either climbing up that ladder over and over again and trying to do it as fast as I could. And speed climbing ladders is not something I do on a regular basis. Or maybe going down that rope and kind of plopping into the ground, since you'd sort of be hanging there. And hanging from ropes and swinging 30 feet into a body of water is, again, not something I do on a regular basis. What was interesting was that it wasn't like pulling a muscle or something like that. There wasn't a moment where I was like, ooh, that hurts, or I did something weird. For runners or any kind of athletes, you'll get those injuries where you sort of feel something and you immediately know that something popped or something felt off, or you're kind of like, hey, this is not right. I didn't really feel that in the case of the hernia. And when I started to notice something was off was the next day I went for my usual run and just felt this kind of general, like this soreness and tightness down in my abdominal area. And what I assumed was it was from climbing the ladder or from the fact that I was doing a little more strength training. It basically kind of felt like I had done, too many sit-ups or done a really hard ab workout. And the next day kind of had this general soreness. So I assumed temporary injury, overuse kind of thing. I'm just going to run through it and I'll be fine. And after a week or so, it wasn't really going away. And this wasn't like a debilitating injury. It wasn't something where I was like, oh, I can't run, I need to see somebody immediately. It was more a feeling, the best I could describe it as kind of like a disconnect between, the two sort of halves of my body. And I know that sounds probably a little bit strange, but like the first quarter mile or so I'd run, it didn't quite feel like my legs and my upper body were working together the way they normally would. And again, not really a feeling of significant pain or anything like that. This feeling of disconnected, my body not quite working the way it normally did. And, kind of a soreness / annoying type of feeling where it's like, what the heck's going on here? Is this going to go away? But nothing specific, like nothing like, oh, sharp pain in one particular area of my body, just this sort of general like abdominal area. This doesn't quite feel right. And being somebody who's either, has some combination of relatively high pain tolerance and relatively high laziness, didn't really reach out to my doctor or anything, just kind of assume this was something that hopefully would work itself out eventually. So this is about August timeframe of last year. Finally had my annual physical in, I think, February, Marchish of this year. And I think I mentioned to my doc, I had this sort of weird abdominal feeling. Can't remember if I did or I did not. But if you're a man above a certain age, and I don't know if they do this to the ladies or not, having never been a woman at any point in my life, probably the least enjoyable part of your annual physical as a dude is when you gotta go and drop your drawers. The doc puts their hands in various parts of your nether regions and asks you to cough. And I never really knew what that was for. I, always somewhere in the back of my mind thought it was some sort of medical joke where they just, get a little handsy and make you cough for their own amusement. But ultimately, that's apparently a hernia check. And at the end of that part of the physical, my doc basically said, hey, you've got a hernia down there, pretty common type of thing. And his advice was basically kind of ride it out. These things generally don't go away by themselves. They generally either sort of stay the same or kind of get a little worse, get a little better sort of thing. And he's, what I like about the doc I generally use is he's not somebody that's immediately like, oh, go get surgery, go take this pill or whatnot. He's usually like let's try a natural intervention or let's try, sort of doing nothing versus, immediately going under the knife. So that was kind of his advice in that February, Marchish timeframe. And he said, hey, if this gets worse, the option is basically, surgery. So now I realize that my problem actually has a name. It's not something that's going to resolve itself. It's not something I can resolve through stretching or strength training or something like that. And I did a little more research, and kind of the conclusion I came to was, yes, the primary option is surgery. In some cases, I guess there's doctors who will go and kind of poke and jam around there and occasionally can get whatever part of your guts have gotten out of place back into place. But that didn't seem like something that was routinely done or routinely successful. So I kind of resolved myself to, hey, I'm going to deal with this. And, obviously kept on running. At the start of my runs, that feeling would extend a little bit. Again, that feeling of kind of disconnectedness / just something's not right versus intense pain or anything like that. What I also noticed was if I'd get a bad cold and I'd kind of get a couple or 3 bad coughs in, that's when I'd feel like a little bit of a sharp pain down in that nether region type of area. And so it certainly seemed like it was not staying stable or getting better. It seemed like it was starting to get a little bit worse. And I did have 1 or 2 runs where just, I started out and things just really didn't feel good. And I think I either called the run or shortened my distance or something like that. So this is probably now like a Mayish type time frame of this year. Went back to my primary care doc and basically said, hey, this thing is getting worse seemingly. What are the options here? They referred me to a surgeon, went and saw her. She kind of did the cough test again, said, yeah, you got a hernia on the left side. I guess you can get them on different sides. And maybe there's something going on the right side. And, basically the option that's recommended is to go and do surgery. The particular type of surgery that she proposed, and again, I'm not a medical professional or anything, so I may get these terms wrong, but it was a laparoscopic surgery with a robot. And my understanding of that is they basically make 3 cuts, and I've got 3 little incisions on my gut, which I will not show you for the sake of nobody wants to see my hairy ass belly. And they go in there, they pump some, I think it's CO2 into your gut. So they basically inflate you like a balloon that separates the skin from the muscle. They jam something down there with a little camera and some sort of manipulating tool. They go in, figure out where your guts are hanging out, poke those bad boys back in, and then put a little piece of mesh on there that they kind of tack in with some sort of tool. And that basically is kind of like putting a new screen on a window. It theoretically reinforces the area, keeps your guts from popping back out, and it's kind of a lifetime thing. That mesh is in there, it doesn't deteriorate, it's sort of with you till you die, as far as I understand. And it fixes that particular incidence of the hernia and hopefully reinforces that area. It doesn't serve as like a lifetime, bulletproof, no more hernias. I guess you can get another hernia in the same place. They did, in my case, the repair or the problem was just on the left side. So that's where they did the work. This could still happen to me on the right side, I guess. But that was ultimately the surgery that they suggested performing. Like I'm sure many of you, it's a little bit frustrating maybe when you get recommended surgery and it's, there's not really a Yelp of surgeons or anything where you can go and see, hey, is this person competent? Do they know what they're doing? There were some Google reviews out there and that sort of thing. But to some extent, you have to kind of go on a leap of faith and and basically trust your gut based on your first interaction with that surgeon. This lady seemed to know what she was doing. She had done a whole bunch of these. What little I could find on Google was pretty positive. So we ultimately scheduled the surgery. Now, for the surgery itself, I kind of explained the procedure as I understand it. It's in my case, outpatient surgery. So rolled into the hospital, I think around 7:30 in the morning, went through all the sort of check-in procedures and all that stuff. And ultimately, I think 9:35 was when, they went in there and started digging around and fixing things up. It is a surgery where they give you general anesthesia. So that's, lights out, nighty night type of deal. And at least at the hospital I went to, nurses were super nice. Everyone was very professional, kind of put me at ease. I'm not somebody that's had a lot of surgeries, thankfully, other than a couple for this janky finger that no longer straightens out. So it's not something I'm super comfortable with or have done a lot. So it was nice to have people that did a good job kind of putting me at ease. But basically the routine looked something like, show up at the hospital, go through all the paperwork and the BS, get yourself stripped down and put on one of those big burlap potato sack type gown things. And then you're hanging out in the bed, chilling out there for a little bit. And then you go through the, stereotypical movie cut scene, being wheeled on the gurney through a whole bunch of different doors. I kind of wish I had had like a little GoPro or some sort of camera, because it really was that, stereotypical movie shot of the gurney wheeling down and the lights flapping over your head and, being jammed through doors and all that stuff. And ultimately ended up in an operating room. Probably the most noteworthy thing about that operating room was I was like, oh, I can see why our healthcare in the United States is rather expensive, because there were all sorts of machines everywhere. Place was immaculate. It looked like the set of a sci-fi movie. And they kind of plopped me from the gurney to the, I don't know what you call it, whatever the operating table type thing is. Had a little chat with the OR nurse, who again was lovely and very competent and professional, and did a great job kind of putting me at ease about this thing. She confirmed that I was there for that surgery, confirmed that I was going to be on anesthesia and all that stuff. And then, I had an IV installed earlier during the burlap sack period. They knocked my ass out. From what my wife said, who was kind of my ride and assistant throughout this process, as she often is during these types of events, it was about an hour and a half for the actual surgery. I basically woke up in kind of a recovery area. I get a little goofy off anesthesia the few times I've had it. And, this time kind of woke up and had this idea in my head that the Canadian government needed to know about my surgery. And this was, for some reason, a critical piece of national security information. And I think I tried to tell the recovery lady to make sure she reached out to Canada and told them that the surgery was complete. But ultimately, I don't know what it was about this anesthesia. I don't know if it was some new technology or something, but I kind of came back to reality pretty quickly and, felt pretty decent and pretty normal afterwards versus, I think when I was 18-ish, I got my wisdom teeth pulled and, I was on cloud nine for hours on that one. This one woke up and had that whole weird Canada fantasy, but then came around and was kind of feeling pretty normal afterwards. So surgery's done. I'm awake. They wheel you from the recovery area back to where I started. Ultimately, you get out of your burlap sack, you get somebody to help you, put your clothes back on. I'd recommend if you do this, wear stuff that's pretty loose. They did go and shave all the hair in the area they were operating on, which was something they did after they knocked me out. So, not something I had to deal with while being awake, which I think ultimately was good. And I ended up, like I said, with 3 cuts. There's kind of one big one here that ultimately sort of looks like a additional belly button, which is a little weird. And then 2 smaller cuts here. And my understanding is they kind of go through with the main instrument through that big hole and then, do some sort of ancillary smaller stuff through those little side holes. So you basically end up with 3 incisions. They sealed me up with that super glue stuff, and I forget the medical term, but no sutures or anything like that. And at this stage, everything's kind of healing up pretty well. I guess that super glue stuff will fall off after a few more days, and that kind of leaves me with, I assume, some scars there, but should be not that bad compared to, I guess, in the older alternative, they go and cut a big old incision, do the work, and have to stitch you up. Now, in terms of recovery, they did give me a prescription for some opioid painkiller. I didn't fill that. I have some, moral and conspiratorial qualms about opioids and that sort of thing, so try and avoid them where I can. But the pain wasn't terrible. I think the first couple or 3 days, they suggest alternating between Tylenol and an Advil type thing. The Advil sort of reduces inflammation and swelling. And that was probably the biggest challenge for the first 4 or 5 days after the surgery. At the end of the day, it felt basically like I'd eaten just a massive meal. Like, if you go to an all you can eat buffet or something, or eat like a 10 courser or whatever, and you just feel like you're literally about to bust your gut, like your skin's, expanding against all that food you jammed in there. It felt like that. I wasn't eating a ton, but I think things down there were just kind of swollen. So you just have this feeling of like, whoa, I, ate some massive 20-course meal and feel like I can barely move. The Advil tended to help with that, so I would take some of those before I went to sleep. The incisions were a little bit sore. I think night one, I kind of slept okay, took a few naps, laid on the couch and sort of relaxed. Night two, didn't have a great sleep. I had that big bloated feeling. Things were a little bit sore, the incisions and all that stuff. And then night three, I think I had a pretty rockin' sleep. Things were kind of getting back to normal. I think the day after the surgery, so I had the surgery Monday. On Tuesday, I kind of took a little shuffle around our cul-de-sac. My exercise was maybe like 100-yard walk around the cul-de-sac. Walk might be a bit of a overselling term. It was more of a 100-yard shuffle. Wednesday-ish, ended up walking, maybe 300 or 400 yards. And then, I've been doing progressively building walks. I think yesterday I did like a 5-ish mile walk. So I'm moving around pretty good again. I'm not having that, just ate a 20-course meal feeling anymore. I haven't taken any, Tylenol or any sort of pain medicines in the last probably 36 hours or so. So a week into it, I'd say pretty back to normal. Things still feel a little funky. The incisions, when I sleep, still, I'm kind of sleeping on my back more than my sides. I'm usually a side sleeper. Feel a little bit of just sort of things going on in the area where they did the repair, but no pain. And interestingly, when I cough now, I don't feel that little ping of pain that I had when the hernia was in there. So presumably everything worked. The only problem I had, and it was very weird because it was only for one day, and I think this was either Wednesday or Thursday, so a couple or 3 days after surgery, I had, my first really spectacular sleep post-surgery. Woke up in the morning just feeling like $1,000,000, came down the stairs, was walking to my office and got this just massive shooting pain in my left quad. Like, combination muscle pull, jolt of electricity, just, literally had to stop walking, kind of put my hands on the table and take a couple of beats and get my life back together. And just really, really hurt. And, I was able to walk a little bit, kind of get things moving again. But had that happen a couple or 3 more times during the day. And when I went to bed that night, I got into bed as I usually do. And before I was able to fully get into bed, it got that same just shooting, like really bad pain. Same kind of need to stop what I'm doing, get my life in order, take 4 or 5 breaths. My wife sort of said, hey, why don't you go try getting in bed the opposite way, which is a lot harder than it sounds. Try getting in bed just your normal way and then try and go in the other side or reverse directions, and a little bit of a mental challenge there. But got in, went to sleep, was a little worried some nerve was pinched or something bad had happened there. But since then, I've not had that problem at all. So, since then, everything's moving fine. I'm walking, I'm, kind of moving around. They tell you not to lift more than 10 pounds for the first couple of weeks. So I've been avoiding lifting anything big. And I think I'm basically ready to go back to running. I might try and do a mile-ish tomorrow, see how things shake out. In addition to my normal walk, maybe up that to a couple or 3 miles. But I'd expect in a week or two, I'll kind of be back to normal running. So overall, would I do the surgery again? I think it's still early days. It's been 8 days since I had the surgery. But so far, the results seem positive. Not a lot of pain. The recovery's been pretty good after that Wednesday, Thursday-ish. And it does seem like it actually fixed the fundamental problem. I don't feel that sharp pain when I cough. I haven't, done any significant running yet, but I've, kind of moved around a little bit. That's the other place I'd feel the hernia. If I was doing something like playing soccer with the kids where you're rapidly changing direction or stopping and starting, I'd feel that discomfort, borderline pain, annoying feeling down in that kind of core groin area. I haven't been playing soccer or anything like that, but I have tried sort of moving a little more aggressively, I guess I'd say, and it's still at the walking stage and haven't felt that pain there. So I think that's going to be big. I'm kind of looking forward to starting a run and everything working as it should, everything kind of communicating and operating as it normally did. Because I've been, about a year with that weird disconnected feeling, and it didn't stop me from running. I ultimately did my first 100-mile ultra with a hernia and didn't die, but did feel a little weird. Was kind of something that was there the whole time, but I basically was able to put it on my mind, and that feeling now seems to be gone. So I'm pretty excited about getting out for a run and feeling how things shook out. So if you're a runner and you've got this kind of weird feeling in your core that hasn't gone away, maybe worth checking with your doc and seeing if it is a hernia. Again, the test is super simple. They do that little coffee thing and grab you in places you don't necessarily want to be grabbed, or maybe you do if that's your thing. I would never recommend self-diagnosing, but if you do cough and feel a weird pain down in your groin area, that I assume is a sign that maybe it's worth getting a quick checkup with your normal doc. If they do recommend that surgery, obviously like any surgery, do your own research, check with your doc, check with other people that have done this. In my case, it seemed to have been pretty effective. The recovery time seems to have been, pretty light, nothing too intense so far. And knock on wood, because I'm not out of the woods yet, and who knows what could happen. But it seems like something that's pretty common despite there not being a lot of talk about it. It seems like a surgery that's pretty standard, so you're not doing anything that's cutting edge or particularly goofy or risky or anything like that. And it seems like something that generally works with the caveats and side effects that your doc will, I'm sure, tell you about. And so if you've got a hernia, if you just found out you did and you're a runner, or if you've got that funky feeling, go and check things out with your doc. But I can, at least in a sample size of 1, tell you that in my case, seems like a relatively easy, albeit relatively dramatic and expensive fix that'll ultimately get you back to running, hopefully get any sort of weird disconnected feelings or pain or however you're experiencing your hernia resolved pretty quickly. And hopefully I will see you out there on the mean streets, on the trails, up in the mountains or whatever, and hopefully you are able to get back after it for whatever floats your boat. And with that, this is a hopefully hernia-free Big Heavy, wishing you well and wishing you peace. I had the recent experience of getting diagnosed with a inguinal hernia,